Agreed. The Honourable Kieran McAnualty.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The problem with that speech is that I just don't believe it. And there are many New Zealanders around that don't either. And because I find the Minister to be about as disingenuous as you can get. And here he is standing in the House making all sorts of promises to the country, as he has done throughout the campaign, but what is in the bill doesn't match what he is saying. There were a lot of claims made tonight, Mr. Speaker, that if people were to take the Minister at what he was saying, they would expect that rates would not continue to go up. But he failed short of making that promise because he knows in his heart of hearts that rates will continue to go up, because the advice that he has received is that this approach by this government will still result in rates increasing. And there's a number of reasons why I find his claims to be disingenuous. The workings that they are going on is on a false assumption that the level of expenditure that is required over the next 30 years is less than half than what was claimed previously. Now, we know through peer-reviewed assessment that was derived from Council's own numbers that there needs to be up to $185 billion spent over the next 30 years. The Minister claims that it is less than half of that, not by looking at Council's own numbers and projections over 30 years, looking at Council's projections from their long-term plan. That is not being upfront with New Zealand, because he knows that councils won't reflect 30 years' worth of work in their long-term plan because it's only 10 years out, and that there will be, through the process that councils have had to go through over the last wee while, a number of large-scale projects that won't be reflected in those 10 years. But he stood up and he told the country that this is affordable for councils. So New Zealanders are in a situation where the Minister's making a claim and we're making a claim, so why don't they listen to neither of us and listen to the credit rating agencies instead? Because ultimately, Mr. Speaker, it's the credit rating agencies that determine the cost of borrowing. Because borrowing is the reality when it comes to this water infrastructure. We cannot escape that fact. Regardless of how much needs to be spent, it needs to be borrowed. Now, when the Minister stands up and says that it is a fraction of the cost and a fraction of the expenditure, and the credit rating agency turns around and say, we don't believe you, then nor should New Zealanders. And we certainly don't. I don't think he's being upfront. What he's doing is finding a political solution to a massive issue facing this country. An issue that hits every New Zealander, whether they own their home or whether they rent. Rates determine the costs that hit their household. And I think rates are going to be the biggest issue facing households in this country over the next wee while. And this bill isn't going to help at all. And so they stand up here in this House and say we are helping councils when they know from their own advice that they're not. And on the back of dismissing the recommendations that came from the Future of Local Government Review, calling it woke nonsense, despite the fact that the recommendations had alternatives for councils, had some tools and levers that they could pull so that they didn't have to rely on rates, they've dismissed it. So the only option they've got is rates. And they have the gall, after doing those two things, to turn around and stand up in front of councils and lecture them in a patronising, cynical and arrogant way and tell them it's their fault. Again, that's political. That is a political calculation because they know they've stuffed up. They know that they set the rules within which the councils operate, and they know that they have now made sure that councils have no option but to continue to increasing rates, and they don't want to cop it in 2 years' time at the next election, so they are bending over backwards to make sure that the inevitable fury that comes from ongoing rates increases goes towards mayors and councillors instead of them. Well, my message to ratepayers is that it's actually not your mayors and councillors' fault. These guys are trying to spin it as if it is, but it's their fault. The next time they get a bill and they are surprised by the rates increase, remember this. Councils had the government had an opportunity to help councils out, and they blew it. They blew it for political reasons, and now they tied their legs together, and then they turn around and criticise them for not being able to walk. Now, I could give them a week, an entire sitting week, Mr. Speaker, and ask them to come up with all the lists of what they call wasteful spending, and it could be as long as you like, but it's not even going to scratch the surface. When over 80% of councils' expenditure is on water and on roads, and all they want councils to focus on is roads, water and picking up rubbish. That was the Minister's response in question time today. Even if councils got rid of all the libraries and all the pools and all the sports grounds and didn't do up the local footpaths and didn't do up the local town centre, rates would still go up. And if they were being upfront with New Zealand, they would declare that, but they're not. And that is why I believe the Minister is being disingenuous.
I think we've managed to sum up most of what Kieran's got to sit there and say. But, put it this way. Who remembers having to go to a council pool facility to do swimming lessons because we weren't allowed to do it in the swimming pool on the property of the school?
Mm-hmm. Well, there are places around the country that only have council facilities. For example, if you look at somewhere like Kirikiriroa, Hamilton, there's no private clubs that have large enough pools to be able to train professional swimmers outside of Waterworld Te Rapa. So that's where they train their big swimmers. Otherwise, they end up going to places like Matamata or heading even further afield to places like Hastings, which has had one open fairly recently, or up here to Tamaki, up to the event centre up here, because they just don't have the facilities. But the facilities that they do have are provided by the council. So the question of what is an essential is a really strange one to begin with, because people think roading and picking up your rubbish, but for schools, for example, going to those particular swimming pools, that's an essential. Libraries these days aren't just books, it's where you go in and you can apply for jobs online, access the internet, get a whole bunch of different resources.
Go to the in Petone, it's the library's the post office as well, because the post office closed and Hutt City Council said, we'll take the contract.
So the idea of focusing on essentials is it's very much a baiting comment. It's we're going to get tough on crime kind of baiting comment, and that there's no basis of fact behind it, because there is no one single ideal as to what a basic is when it comes to councils.
You're very quiet there, Eric.
Right, I'm just contemplating what you're all saying. You're right in the sense that there are so many services that council has done well, especially the library. I mean, who has not benefited from the library? I'll just put my hands up. I love reading, I love books, and I'm a Wilbur Smith fan, and thank God for the library. So without councils funding the libraries, and it's also a place of community. I mean, Citizen Advice Bureau is where people meet together, the elderly to whatever age levels, and you have sometimes someone narrating a story like a tale for younger children. So I mean, it's a place where people meet up, and mixed up, and community gathering. So maybe to be fair, I mean, in Parliament you can't say much, right? I'm sure that the well knowledgeable members of Parliament of the Crown Government, some of them would know that there are more than just rubbish and delivery of the basic services. So, I mean, obviously the library.
What I'd love to know is recycling a essential service, not just rubbish collection? Because some people go, having recycling getting collected is woke nonsense. Having organics getting collected is a waste of money, or I don't want to sit there and have that. And I mean, we're in Wellington, we're about to go into having organics collected. I do know in Upper Hutt, they don't have any, they only have the recycling station. You drop it off, there is no curbside collection. I do know in Lower Hutt, they also, what's it called? From what Stacey just said, being an Upper Hutt person, they don't even fund the rubbish collection. In Lower Hutt, your rubbish bin is provided by the council. Porora want to emulate what Lower Hutt did, because Porora had a high number of contaminated recycling, ironically from the more lower socio-economic suburbs. I mean, there's all sorts of things when you use the word rubbish. Is it recycling or is it just rubbish?
Here on the North Shore, we pay for rubbish collection, but recycling is paid in by our rates.
Right. Yeah.
So which one is it's same with the organic collection, actually. That's also covered in our rates. But for the actual rubbish collection, you have to pay for that.
Yeah, because Tauranga City Council, they do everything, as we discovered when we were up there for 9 days. They do everything up there. And it's brilliant because they've got such a low amount of waste heading towards the tip.
Yeah.
Yeah.